Whoever said that good things come to those who wait might as well have been talking about asparagus. Sure, for most of us, the wait for asparagus need only be as long as a trip to the grocery store. But the saying doesn't refer to acceptable things or better than nothing things. It's about good things. Sometimes even upgraded to great things. And if you're in the mood for some great asparagus, then much like other vegetables, you need to grow it at home and enjoy it fresh from the garden. Or so we're told. Because truth be told, we've never actually grown asparagus ourselves. And the primary reason is because from first planting to first harvest, homegrown asparagus takes at minimum 2 to 3 years. And for relatively new gardeners, that feels like a lifetime. But here's the thing, it recently occurred to me that we've just begun our 4th growing season, which means that if we had planted asparagus during our first or even second year, we'd already be eating some today. So perhaps the more productive saying is actually the rebuttal, that some things may come to those who wait, but only the things left behind by those who hustle. Or in other words, if we ever hope to eat some great asparagus, we'd better hurry up and get planting. Sure, waiting is important, but we still have to do the work. However, that actually brings me to the second reason for why we've not yet planted asparagus in our garden. You see, from what we've read, the process can be pretty complicated. For example, typical advice tends to sound something like this. First, you need to dig a long trench, some say up to 3 feet deep. Then you add layers of compost and manure, sprinkle in some lime, and mix the soil back in. Once they're planted, we're told to add a top dressing of compost tea and side dressings of organic fertilizer. And for the first couple of years, don't forget to keep it well watered and weed-free. But all of this work is justified because anything worth doing is worth doing right. And asparagus is a perennial, which means that once established, it can steadily sprout scrumptious spears spring after spring for several decades. Seriously. Plus, because it's a perennial, we'll never get another chance to dig them up and till in more nutrients. So the first planting is our one and only shot. But hold on, as our regular viewers already know, we follow a strict no-till policy in our garden, meaning that none of our soil is ever amended with tilled-in fertilizers or composts or manure. Sure, we've experimented with a number of different techniques, but nearly all of them have been intended to emulate the processes found in nature. And lately, that's mostly meant simply covering the soil with organic, plant-based mulch and then letting the rest take care of itself. So why go to all this extra work for asparagus if we wouldn't for tomatoes or zucchini or corn? In fact, this brings to mind another old saying. Just because everyone else is doing it, does that mean that it's right? Well, I think the obvious answer to that question is maybe. But there's really only one way to find out for sure. And we do have a reason to be confident in our natural approach. You see, earlier this spring while walking through our forest, Paula happened to stumble upon this asparagus plant, just growing wild in the middle of the woods. And as it turns out, it's not alone. In fact, wild asparagus is surprisingly common in these parts, and can often be found growing in ditches, fields, and forests, all without the help of humans or tillers. And speaking about wild edibles, another plant that grows effortlessly here in our unamended soil is wild strawberries. In fact, our field is absolutely covered in them. All you can see in early spring are the leaves and flowers, but in another month or so, they'll be bursting with a bounty of beautiful berries. And as luck would have it, both strawberries and asparagus are considered to be excellent companions when interplanted in the same bed, which meant that for a couple of gardeners who do their best to take cues from nature, no more hesitation was required. So in this video, let's take a look at how we finally planted some asparagus and strawberries for ourselves. First things first, we needed to decide on a location. And if you've been following along for a while now, then our garden layout should look pretty familiar. We've got a dedicated location for our garlic, for our potatoes, and for our corn. And then we have a mix of hugelkultur mounds and Ruth Stout beds for pretty much everything else. But there's always been one bed left empty, right here. You see, we've had a number of plans for this spot over the past few years, but nothing ever felt quite right. That is, until now. But unfortunately, because we were never quite sure what we wanted to do with this bed, we simply did nothing, meaning that it's still covered in thick sod made up of grasses, clovers, and wildflowers. Ideally for this experiment, it would have been nice to have laid out a thick layer of mulch last fall so that we might have some naturally bare earth to work with now, but no sense dwelling on missed opportunities. Besides, we've dealt with this type of situation before. so we knew just the technique to expose the soil. If you recall, when building our expanded garlic beds, we found that an easy way to convert an unused field into a growing area was to simply flip the sod and shift it sideways. The end result was a series of raised beds made up entirely of topsoil sandwiched around decomposing vegetation. So this time, we decided to do the same thing, but with one minor difference. Since we weren't looking for raised beds, after digging out the first section of sod, we would set it aside. Then the second section would get flipped into the hole left from the first. The third would get flipped into the hole left from the second, and so on, all the way to the end of the bed. Then finally, the last hole would be filled with the first section that we had set aside. Now, at this point, I'm sure some of you will be wondering, how is this any different from simply tilling the area? Well, that's a question that probably deserves an entire video to itself, but the quick answer is that though this is labor-intensive and certainly disruptive to the soil, the hope is that it will still be far less destructive than the alternative. You see, healthy soil isn't just some mixture of minerals and nutrients. It's an entire ecosystem of animals, bacteria, fungus, and plant roots all working together. So by flipping the sod rather than chopping it all up with a tiller, we hope to keep some of that system intact. Plus, many of those grasses and perennial weeds propagate through rhizomes, which once cut into pieces can each multiply. So tilling actually has the potential to make that problem even worse. Of course, flipping the sod still cuts those rhizomes too, but to a much lesser extent. At least, that's the theory. So once our plan was decided, we quickly got to work cutting the sections of sod, flipping them over, and continuing on to the next. This was, of course, a fair amount of work, but for the most part, it went pretty quickly once we hit a rhythm. The only things that really slowed us down were the removal of large stones, the gentle relocation of worms, and tackling the occasional really large stones. But after all the sod was flipped, we were able to clean up our mess and then rake the soil smooth. Okay, now let's talk about planting. We decided to space our asparagus roughly every 1.5 feet down the center of the bed, and then the strawberries between them but on alternating sides. And this was because of the ways that both of these plants spread. From what we've read, over the coming seasons, the asparagus will eventually send up new shoots to fill in this entire row. And each year, the strawberry plants will send out runners to establish new daughter plants, which we can hopefully convince to situate themselves on the opposite side of the bed. Then, after a couple of years, if the mother plants become less productive, we can replace them with the granddaughter plants, and so on. The asparagus came from the nursery as a bundle of bare roots, all held together with an elastic. It looks like a bit of a tangled mess at first, but with a bit of patience, they can be easily separated into individual roots, also known as crowns. Next, we dug a large hole about 6 to 8 inches deep and did our best to spread out the crown evenly. Oh, and looking back, I didn't do a great job in the close-up, but it's also suggested that you form a small mound of earth under the crown so that the roots can be splayed out in a more natural downward angle. After that, just fill in the hole so that the entire crown is covered in about 6 inches of soil. As for the strawberry crowns, they look nearly identical, except slightly smaller. And when planting them, be sure to dig the hole just deep enough that the top of the crown sticks out of the soil slightly once the rest of the roots are covered. And that means that the two plants will mostly occupy a different depth of earth, making them less competitive with each other for space and resources. And once they become established, the same will be true above the ground as well, because in future seasons, the asparagus should send up its spears first thing in the spring, and then by the time the strawberries get going, the spears will have already formed into tall ferns above them. So once we figured out how to plant the first couple, the rest took only about 15 minutes. Then, as usual, we covered the ground with a thick layer of old hay, and then all that was left was the initial watering. But also, as usual, we left that up to good old Mother Nature. And that's it. But now one question remains. Would we recommend that you try this out as well? And the answer is yes and no. No, because, well, quite frankly, we don't yet know how this will turn out, so it would be pretty irresponsible for us to suggest that you follow our example. But on the other hand, in a more general sense, we would absolutely recommend that you occasionally challenge the conventional wisdom. Maybe not if your livelihood depends on it, but if you can afford the risk of a possible failure, then absolutely. I say give it a shot. We never grow unless we try new things, and we never learn unless we're willing to make a few mistakes. And besides, again, we already had a successful example in nature, so at the very least, complete failure seems pretty unlikely. But I guess only time will tell. So we'll let you know how it all works out in about 2 to 3 years. But in the meantime, thanks for watching. Oh, sorry, one more thing. It turns out that it took about 2 months for me to finally get around to putting this video together, so sorry about that. But luckily that gives me an opportunity to add in a really quick update. First of all, as a baseline, the wild asparagus is now fully matured into a tall fern in the forest. And if we look back to the garden, our domestic variety has done the same, albeit at a much smaller scale. However, while the wild strawberries have already produced an abundance of fruit, so far in the garden they're a bit of a no-show. No signs of growth whatsoever. So I guess we'll have to give the berries a bit more time, but worst case, 1 out of 2 ain't bad, and we'll let you know if that score changes. So again, thanks for watching, and waiting, and we'll see you soon.